Hello everybody, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video. Now, it's been a few weeks since the final experiment trip to Antarctica, and the responses from flat earthers have been both plentiful and desperate. From faking breath to no footprints, from a giant LED studio to Masonic traditions with a boot. The responses have not only been epic, but also completely wrong. So, in this video, I'm going to go through the various supposed proofs of fakery that flat earthers have found. Now, the whole VapeGate incident and breath not being seen I've actually already addressed in this video, which I'll link below. But not to worry, there are plenty of other claims left to debunk. So let's start at the beginning. In Antarctica, we each did various live streams during our time recording the 24-hour sun. The first stream that was done was at midnight, when the sun should have most definitely set, but it hadn't. Now, Will did this live stream on the Final Experiments YouTube channel. In it, he talked about the trip, he rotated the laptop round to show the area that we were in and the sun, and then we each had an opportunity to say a few words ourselves on camera. And this is where we ran into conspiracy number one. The green screen. Now, when Critical Think came on to speak, he wanted to go and show his weights experiment that he'd set up in the hut. So he and Will went inside with the laptop to show that. However, unbeknownst to us at the time, because we were all just standing outside and not actually watching the stream, the numbers on the scales weren't visible, because the backlight of the scale screen was green. And Will's laptop had the green screen chroma key option enabled because he usually films in front of a green screen. So it was replacing the scale's screen with the black background that he usually uses. Now, that in of itself was neither here nor there. However, once Will went back outside, I spoke, then Mike spoke, then Jaren, Lisbeth and Austin, and then finally Jonathan. And when Jonathan appeared on screen, there was a big black patch and the letters TFE appearing on his top, which, as you can imagine, sent people into meltdown claiming green screens. Now, as you can see from the photos that I took at the time, Jonathan's top actually has a teal-coloured patch on it, which is where TFE was showing up. Will's chroma key option was just replacing that patch with his usual TFE background, which ironically shows that we can't have been in front of a green screen, because if we were, then whatever we were displaying on the background would have also displayed on Jonathan's top. The funniest part about this conspiracy for me is it nearly didn't happen, because after Jaren, Lisbeth and Austin had all been up to speak, Will just pressed on with the stream, seemingly forgetting that Jonathan hadn't yet spoken. Which is kind of understandable, because Jonathan was there just constantly filming us. So you kind of forgot he was one of the group rather than an outside observer. So we actually ended up just the other side of the laptop from Will, basically gesturing towards Jonathan to try and point out to Will that Jonathan had been missed. So Jonathan almost didn't end up on the stream, so the chroma key glitch would have never have appeared. Then after that stream had finished and Will started to see the comments being made about the whole green screen, we wound up doing another stream later on to highlight the clear lack of green screen, which not only involved Will showing various coloured objects, now with the chroma key option disabled on his computer, but he also flew his drone, and MC Toon streamed live at the same time to give a second vantage point, even at one point having the cameras of the live streams facing towards each other. All in an attempt to show that we weren't in front of a green screen. And I even recorded Will's drone flight on my camera, and all of this was also caught on the 360 cameras as well. But even this stream brought claims of fakery along with it, because Will's drone has a collision warning system, which beeps.
Quiet and listen to the
green
beat,
screen.
man. Sorry.
This drone would not be able to fly backward toward
MC Toon, who's also live streaming.
Who cares?
And who's also...
And now it's beeping that he's getting closer to it.
Mm.
It was beeping, and people seem to think that was somehow the drone being near the edge of the studio.
Yes, maybe he touched
All
down
right,
to.
now I'm going to come right back
It got
to
close
us.
to it got close to the screen. It got close to the
Yeah.
screen in the studio. That's what happened. And Toon tried to cover it up by walking toward the thing, but it was beeping way fast. If you listen when it goes away from Toon, it goes beep, 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 and starts slowing down. And then it gets off in the distance and starts going dee 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 dee, and then Toon starts walking to it. If it was because of Toon, it would have started off slow and gotten faster.
Now, Where's Wally has actually put together a synced up video showing the view from Will's and Toon's live streams, the recording from the drone itself, Mark Herman was recording, as well as the video that I captured.
So obviously, there was a green screen. This drone would not be able to fly backward toward MC Toon, who's also live streaming. And who's also filming the drone. Alright, now I'm going to come right back to us. Alright.
Seemingly, they overlook that when the drone first starts up, it's right next to a stand with a laptop on it. Then, as the drone is backing away, MC Toon is walking along with it, and the drone beeps are going off. MC Toon then stops, the drone carries on moving away from him, eventually the beeping then stops. Will starts bringing the drone back towards the laptop, the beepings then start as it's getting near to Toon again. So, yes, of course, the drone is beeping because it's detecting Toon as a potential obstruction. And the funny thing is, they claim that the drone starts beeping up again because it's reaching the edge of the studio wall. But you can see from the footage how far away the drone goes from Will, and then he brings it back. After he's brought it back again, I went walking off down the same path to take some photos. You can see me on the time-lapse footage as well as in the background of Will's stream, and I walked much further away than the drone went. So why didn't I walk into a wall? But anyway, after we then recorded the full 24-hour sun, the first standalone video we published was a 48-second time-lapse view of the sun circling around us, and that went up on my YouTube channel. This was a sped-up clip that was taken from the full 25-minute 360-degree time-lapse. The full 360 time-lapse was some 36 gigabytes in file size, which was just too much to upload on the camp's internet. So I made a sped-up tracked version, which was less than 300 megabytes, much more manageable for shared Wi-Fi. And as a side note, as this was the first video that we were publishing of the 24-hour sun, I felt it was appropriate that Will himself publish it, since it was him that made the whole trip possible.
We are publishing our first time-lapse of the 24-hour sun right here in Antarctica. Done.
But once that video went live, Flat Earthers quickly began looking for faults with it. And the first one that I saw people bring up, I think it came from Flat Earth Banjo, who'd noticed that near the end of the time-lapse, you can see sunlight shining down the side of my tracked camera.
You see that the light is shining towards the side of the camera, meaning that the source of the light, the sun, is really coming from the east and not from the south. Okay, so these guys got busted, and they will have to lie for the rest of their lives, just like Buzz Aldrin.
And of course, how could sunlight be shining down the side of a camera if the camera is supposed to be tracking towards the sun? Well, the simple answer is that it had stopped following the sun at that point. In the 360 time-lapse, you can see that the tracker actually reverses direction and starts spinning the camera away from the sun, which then, of course, causes the sunlight to be approaching the camera from the side and lighting up the side of it. Mind you, this is the same flat earth banjo that thinks he's debunked the entire final experiment by comparing the elevation of the sun in one of our video clips to the elevation of the sun seen at a similar latitude in the northern hemisphere in Svalbard in Norway in June. However, it seems Flat Earth Banjo either didn't notice, or he was hoping his audience wouldn't notice, that he's looking at the midnight sun in the north at midnight. It's actually written quite clearly there on the screen. Now in Antarctica, the sun reached its lowest elevation when it was south of us, which was out over Mount Rossman. But you can see in the footage of MC Toon, the sun is over behind the hut that we were staying in. And looking at the 360 footage, you can easily see that the hut is in the opposite direction to Mount Rossman. So really, all that Flat Earth Banjo has actually managed to confirm with this is that the sun at midday is higher than the sun at midnight. Then the next claim I faced came from King Nico, who had a debate with Fight the Flat Earth about the final experiment.
What popped into mind was the Las Vegas sphere. Not that they were in Las Vegas and did it there, but in Las Vegas, they have a sphere, a massive sphere, LED screens, 8K. You can see images on the outside of it and on the inside. So I've seen some footage of, locations similar to Antarctica with mountains and a sun moving across the sky inside of the sphere. So I'm like, that's it. They must have somehow knocked up a sphere, or there's another sphere in Antarctica that we don't know about.
This was after I'd got back to the UK, and his claims were so bewildering, I wound up joining the discussion just to try and wrap my head around it.
I just want to check this here. So you acknowledge that we didn't fake the footage from taking off from Punta Arenas, flying to Antarctica, that going to Union Glacier Camp.
Yeah.
That is us
all
in
that
Antarctica.
Is real. You guys can
great.
prove that, and I'm not going to say that that's wrong. You guys are going to have footage of you guys sleeping in the heated tents or whatever it is and walking around that area. But I'm saying that there's going to be parts where you traveled supposedly 5 miles to do the shoot for the 24-hour sun, and obviously that is not at the Union Glacier Camp because you obviously can't see it in the footage, so you had to travel away. And what I am saying is that because I know for a fact, because, God says, the sun is not going to do an orbit east to west 24 hours in the South Pole. So the only way that could have been baked is through the means of virtual studios.
So he's openly accepting that we went to Antarctica, but he's claiming that because we didn't film the sun from the main Union Glacier camp, that must then mean we'd prepared this giant dome studio made up of all LED TV panels away from the main camp. And that we were then instead being driven from the main Union Glacier camp to the dome studio to create the 24-hour footage, whilst presumably he thinks that outside of the studio, the sun was setting. Even Eric Dubé has actually jumped on this idea that we used a studio of LED panels to fake the 24-hour sun.
Unbeknownst to most, for the past few years, portable, panoramic, 360-degree LED studio setups now exist and are being used for Hollywood productions like The Mandalorian and many others.
Although I'm not entirely sure he's as willing to accept that we were in Antarctica. Possibly that the studio was just somewhere else entirely. Although I'm not even sure why Eric Dubé is so desperate to try and dismiss the 24-hour sun, because he's been saying for weeks that it doesn't prove anything.
Unfortunately for Will, and to the surprise of no flat earthers, the results of his experiment haven't changed people's minds and aren't the final words on anything. As I said would happen, back when this idea was introduced, in typical globe apologist fashion, the final experiment has conflated a celestial observation with our terrestrial foundation.
So why does he care if it actually happened or not? But anyway, we're going to tackle this in two parts. Firstly, Nico's idea that we've built some giant studio in Antarctica. Now, several of us filmed the flight from Punta Arenas to Union Glacier, which Nico's seen, and he's happy the flight footage is real. That's why he's happy to accept we were in Antarctica. And as we approached landing, Union Glacier Camp was visible out of the left side of the plane. I was sitting on the right, so I didn't film it, but I did at least capture a photo of Union Glacier Camp from across the aisle. But Critical Think recorded the whole flight from the left side. This is his footage. That is Union Glacier Camp and the skiway where the small planes of theirs land. And then there is this loop that they have for people to run, ski, or bike around. In fact, we also took a scenic flight in one of the Twin Otters around the mountains, and Critical Think recorded some footage out of the window during takeoff, and we flew around Halfway Point. You can see clearly where Halfway Point is in relation to the main camp. Then there was actually an ice marathon that was held there a few days before we arrived. And for the marathon, they added a dogleg extension onto the loop to extend it out to 10 kilometers, I believe it was. Now, on that dogleg, they placed a cabin and some toilets for staff who were there helping the runners. Now, because that point was halfway round the loop, it therefore became referred to as Halfway Point. And this is where ALE offered to station us for recording the 24-hour sun, because there was concerns that from the main Union Glacier camp, Mount Rossman might obstruct our view of the sun, but from Halfway Point it wouldn't. And you can see, looking at our views from Halfway Point, you can see the turns in the track. I then recorded this footage of someone walking along the regular loop, so they were walking along the straight section of path, and we were located in the dogleg section with Mount Rossman visible in the background. I even showed Nico a section of the time-lapse footage where we all climbed into the back of the Tucker and it drove us away from the site. I even have that same moment in real time from the 24-hour video recording from Will's 360 camera. Then, during our time at Halfway Point, we caught one of the Twin Otter planes actually coming into land at the main camp. Again, Will's 360 camera picked it up as it approached and landed. And upon hearing the plane approaching, because I'd been warned by staff that it would be landing, I walked off down the path with Jonathan to try and get as close to the camp as possible to record it. Now, unfortunately, you don't see the plane touch down at the main camp because the whole camp is obscured by a rise in the ice. Yes, the ice isn't flat. In fact, they even took us trekking over hills of ice. Anyway, the point is that we had an aerial view of our camp only a few hours before we were there, and there is no giant studios anywhere in sight. And you can see from the all of the 360 footage, we were only away from Halfway Point for about 90 minutes each time while they took us back to the main camp for meals. So we can't have been that far from the main camp. But of course, there is still the idea that maybe we were never in Antarctica and that we were just in some giant studio somewhere else entirely, and everything that you're seeing is being projected on LED screens around us, just like they used for the production of The Mandalorian. Except there's a few glaring problems with that idea. If you look at the footage from the Mandalorian series, when they're using those LED studios, you'll notice none of the actors cast shadows, because shadows are created when an object is obscuring light from a light source. But if you're surrounded 360 degrees by LED screens projecting out a landscape, then you have light coming at you from all directions, which then removes all shadows. And yet everything in Antarctica clearly is casting shadows. And just to be clear, Projecting a bright sun onto an LED TV screen does not replicate shadows like the sun creates. I can demonstrate this easily by displaying our time-lapse footage onto a curved computer monitor and placing an object in front of the screen. And you can see as I move the footage around so the sun is in different parts of the screen, there are no solid shadows being cast and following that sun. The way they produce shadows in the Mandalorian studios is by having a full lighting rig above the LED screens. The screens only actually cover the walls of the studio because the cameras are always looking horizontal. So they can have lighting above the ceiling that is out of sight of the camera, and that shines light down onto the actors set up to match whatever they're displaying on the background. But all of our footage was a full 360-degree view in all directions. And even when we were live streaming, there were times that we had the cameras angled quite high up, clearly showing the sky, and there's no lighting rigs above us. So if we were really surrounded in all directions by LED screens, absolutely nothing would be casting a shadow. The 360 video that I just showed of us getting off the 757 actually helps with two other arguments that flat earthers have put out. No footprints and the sun changing shape.
Anytime close-up footage of their feet was shown, their footprints always failed to make any impression in the snow.
Even though if you compare from the start of the time-lapse footage and run through to the end, you can see you clearly get more footprints the later on you go. But the simple reason why there's no footprints is because the snow that we were walking on was actually heavily compacted. Bear in mind, you don't get much snow in Antarctica anyway, so there's only a thin layer over basically a lot of ice. And as I pointed out earlier, we were on part of the route that they used for the ice marathon a few days before. Now, runners do not want to run through soft snow. They want firm ground. The grooves all over the ground you can see came from ALE's tractors that had been marking out the route by dragging a big snowplow behind them, which packed down the snow. So it was actually much closer to ice in texture. You can see as I get off the 757 and onto terra firma, I'm not leaving any footprints there behind me either because the ground is so firm. Here's a clip I took of the Tucker leaving camp, and at this point, this is full of people and gear because it's taking them up to the ice runway. And you will notice how several tons of truck leaves barely a mark on the ground, so you can imagine how much of a little impact a lone person is going to make. The area that we were walking in at halfway point was mainly firm, packed down snow. The untouched areas of snow surrounding us was much softer, but the ALE staff had told us not to wander too far into that because they didn't know what the ground underneath it was like. They didn't know how deep it was. There could have been a giant hole that nobody knew about, so they advised us to just stay off that stuff. Which ties us into another point that people have been bringing up. During Austin's live stream, people had been asking him to show some snow. So he went inside and got his gloves, but then when he came back out and he put the gloves on, he walked away several feet from the camera to pick up some snow. And flat earthers have been taking issue with why did he have to walk all the way over there if he's supposedly standing on snow?
Rather than picking up some of the snow that was all around him, for some reason, Austin walks several feet away and picks up a bit of snow from over there, then walks it back to the camera and lets it fall to the ground. If snow is everywhere all around him, why did he have to walk way over there to get some?
Well, like I've just said, the area that we were on was mainly firm ground, more like ice. So to get dusty snow that people were asking for, Austin had to walk off of the firm ground over to the softer, undisturbed snow. And the 757 footage also helps tackle this idea of the sun changing shape.
Notice how the sun changes from circular to being smushed down horizontally, back to perfectly circular, then smushed across vertically, and then back again. This is not how the sun usually looks or behaves in person, or in genuine footage of the phenomenon from the Arctic.
Now, bear in mind, this was shot with an Insta360, which has two 180-degree fisheye lenses facing in opposite directions. So, when the sun, or any object for that matter, circles all the way around the camera, at some point it has to move to the very edge of one of the fisheye lenses, then cross over the overlap between the lenses, and then it winds up at the very edge of the next lens. So it's naturally going to create distortion. Now, if you watch the sun in the 360 video of me leaving the 757, you can see as I am turning to face in different directions, the sun is obviously moving around the frame of the camera, so it's crossing over between the two lenses. And you can see the sun changing shape. And this is real-time video. The sun is not actually changing shape in the sky. It's merely distortion caused by the 360-degree fisheye lenses. And I can demonstrate this very easily. If I take one of the lights in my studio here, we'll say that this is representing the sun. If I then hold up my Insta360 and I rotate it round, you can see the shape of the light changing in the 360 footage, but the light itself is not physically changing shape. And I've also had a few people bring up the fact that in the same footage you can see the mountains distort. Again, this is just a characteristic of an Insta360 that can be easily demonstrated. And if you watch the time-lapse that I shot of the sun with the solar filter, you can see the sun doesn't actually change shape in the sky. And now, last, but by no means least, let's tackle not only the most recent claim that I've seen, but probably, frankly, the most insane one. And it again comes from King Nico. Yes, apparently I performed some sort of Masonic ritual with a left-footed boot. The funny thing is the only reason that I'd put that left boot under the table is because I'd been using the right one for the rest of the time that we were there. Before we even landed in Antarctica, we'd been told to put our polar gear on. The polar trousers, the polar boots, and then I put the coat on once we'd landed. All of them are rated down to minus 70 degrees C. Except once I got into the Tucker, I pretty quickly warmed up, and at the main camp there was no wind, because they put the camp there specifically because it's quite sheltered by the mountains, and the sun was beating down on us. So very quickly we all shed the polar layers, which in reality are more designed to deal with blizzards. So once we got up to halfway point, we took all the polar gear with us in case the weather turned bad, but it wasn't actually cold enough at the time to need it. But I'd noticed that the polar boots were heavily insulated, and also the fact that they're black, they would absorb heat from being in direct sunlight. So I thought they were a perfect option for putting the power banks in, because batteries notoriously don't like cold. So I figured, keep them in the insulated boot that is black. In direct sunlight, it's gaining a lot of heat from that. Throw in a couple of hand warmers, and then put the insulated pouch from my water bottle onto the top of the boot to try and keep all the heat trapped in so that the batteries would keep going for longer. So I just grabbed one of the boots and put the batteries in. It turned out I'd picked up the right boot. Upon seeing me do this, Will and Mark, who were setting up Will's phone for a live stream for Candace Owens' channel, decided the boot was actually a great idea for storing the battery pack in, so they took the remaining boot that was on the pile, which was my left one. Now their stream unfortunately only lasted a few hours into the early hours of the morning before there was an issue with Starlink that caused the stream to stop. It also caused the stream that MC Toon was doing at the same time to stop, and they couldn't get the Rumble stream back online for Candace Owens. So they ended up just leaving it. So later on, I then decided I was going to do a stream of my own at the end of the 24-hour period to mark the occasion of reaching 24 hours of recording the sum. And one of the things I wanted to do on my stream was explain the setup that I'd been using, which included explaining why there was a random boot on the ground with a bunch of wires coming out of it. So I wanted to show the amount of insulation that was inside the boot. But obviously, the right boot was over there by the tripod holding all the power banks and the cables in, which meant I only had the left boot spare since it was no longer being used for Candace's live stream. So I'd already been and got it from the tripod and threw it back on the pile inside. So when I was then preparing for the live stream, I knew I was going to be setting up on that table outside. So in preparation, I went and got the boot and placed it under the table so that I knew where it was. Absolutely nothing to do with masons in the slightest. Well, I think that's probably enough for this video, at least for now. There are probably more claims that I forgot to include, and I'm sure there'll be even more claims made in the coming weeks anyway, so perhaps I'll revisit this with another video at a later date. But now, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully, we'll see you in the next video.